Hello and welcome to Lit Illuminated. As always, I'm thrilled to have you here with me. This is not only a space for us to talk about books, but also to look at the ways that books inform us about ourselves as well as the people around us. So it has been a while since I've been on this platform. I was recently in Aotearoa and I had grand plans of actually recording the podcast while I was there, and it did not happen. However, I did read some great books, and that's what I'm going to talk to you about today. So I picked up a lot of books while I was in New Zealand, which is what I often do when I'm in Aotearoa. And so I had the joy of reading a few while I was there and brought the rest home with me to continue reading. So today I'm just going to talk about the books that I was reading while I was in Aotearoa recently. So in no order necessarily. So the first book I'm going to talk about is All Sorts of Lies by Claire Harman. And this book is about Katherine Mansfield, and the subtitle is Katherine Mansfield and the Art of Risking Everything. And if you don't know, Katherine Mansfield came from Aotearoa, New Zealand, but spent most of her time in Europe. And what I found really interesting about this book and the way that she investigates Mansfield's life is that it's not just a biography. It's not just like, here's like Mansfield's life. And it's not strictly just let's like do lit analysis of the stories, the short stories that she wrote. Instead, it's a combination of the two. We have a close read of stories, and in that space, interweaving either where Mansfield is in her life at the time of writing it and or how the story itself relates to her own story, and or how it also showcases the way that she pushed against the norms and the standards at the time, kind of moved through there. And then each chapter essentially has the stories section and then the life section. And that really is just then, where was Mansfield at this time? What was she doing? What was happening in her personal life? It's like this inner layering of not only herself, her writing, but also the people she's interacting with. Um, there's a lot of other artists and authors and writers that are part of this. Woolf is in here, D.H. Lawrence, and how they're connected in some of those spaces. And I just really love the close reading as well as the connecting to life and the weaving together of those things. I think for me, the most interesting thing about Mansfield, and one of the reasons I kind of picked this up, was about that subtitle of like the art of risking everything. But I think, she was ahead of her time in some ways, or, pushing against what was standard at that time and thinking about things differently. And even some of the things like when Claire analyzed some of her storytelling and things she does with tenses or the way that she moves like around in narratives, I'm like, oh, I love doing that too. And so it was just refreshing to read about somebody who pushed against norms and tried something different within a space, and kind of was confident in themselves in that space, but also pushing themselves to, you could see her drive to get better and better at what she was doing. So it wasn't like she was trying to conform. It was really that she was trying to get better at her way of telling stories. And at the time, so much of it was like, she didn't get all the benefit of her work and how it reached the world around her in her lifetime. But yeah, if you're interested in Katherine Mansfield at all, or you like the concept of, literary analysis with like weaving a personal story, it's a great book. I really enjoyed it. So while I was also in Aotearoa and I'm reading novels, I was also listening to some audiobooks at the time. I really felt like I wanted some poetry as well. I don't know what prompted me to do that, but I felt like I just kind of need to have some poetry throughout my day, to just read a poem a day at least. And so I um, went back to the bookstore. I visited the bookstore so many times. They're like, don't you want to be on our loyalty group? And I'm like, well, I'm not staying. I'm not from around here, but I am yet again buying another book. So the book of poetry I picked up was Tightrope by Selena Tasatala Marsh. This was my poetry book that I picked up, and I really just wanted to spend some time in the poetry space and the language there. And I felt like this was actually a really good a book to kind of ground me in that space. So if you like poetry, it was good. The very first book I read when I reached Aotearoa that was waiting for me when I got there, because I ordered a bunch of books and had them delivered to my family's house when I was there, is The Mires by Tina Makereti. And this was a very interesting book, and I thought it was insightful that it was the first book that I read as I arrived in Aotearoa. And some of the thing in here is that it's like a collision between generations and cultures and countries, and that they're all brought together in this neighborhood. Like their houses are next to each other. So if you have refugees, you have a Maori, you have a colonizer, Pakeha in that space, and then you have the different generations and how they view people and what they're doing in there, and then all the lives that are intertwined within there. It deals with things like climate change, racism, colonialism, and so at one level it has this idea and this concept about the ways that we're connected and then the ways that we're disconnected, and that it highlights the power of that connection and how in some ways having empathy or seeing someone else in a similar situation and relating to them in that way creates this powerful understanding that we can have in the world. But then how that disconnect or that othering space can really cause harm and disruption, and that it's just there is, even within the space of connection and understanding, there's this undercurrent of hate and misunderstanding that is also part of society, and what happens when they all collide together. So I thought it was really relevant and well written, and an interesting way to step back from narratives that we're hearing personally to look at it more as a story. And that's often things that I talk about in this space, about how books can inform us of ourselves, like of the characters in there, where do you see yourself, or how would you react in those situations, or like where would you fit in the world if that was the scenario you were in. And then also to kind of step back even farther and go, oh, I wouldn't have reacted that way, or gosh, maybe I would have reacted that way and I shouldn't have. So like kind of that whole reflection, but then seeing it as bigger than yourself and your interaction in that space, but how do our actions, even our words and our ways of treating the people around us, affect them and alter their lives. It was really good. I think it's really timely and it fits within what's going on in the world. And so I'd highly recommend that as well, as something to just not only a good read, but also a way to have self-reflection, to, analyze your own neighborhoods, your own interactions with people, or the own way people have interacted with you. So yeah, that was really good. That was the first one I read when I arrived. And then I think this was the second one that I read. And that's Bad Archives by Flora Feltham, I think it is. And this is a creative nonfiction. It's kind of a memoir in essays, I'd say. And I was reading the very first one. So I think I was reading the Meyers when I was in Auckland, and then this is the first book I picked up when I was in Nelson. And the very first essay is on archiving. And friends, it was swoon-worthy. I was like, this is amazing. I love this so much. And I think for me, so much of that was the layering that she does and the layering conversation. But as an archivist, right, she's talking about that process and what they do. And she is showing how stories, timelines, and things like that layer. And you know how I'm always going on about the spiral of time, past, present, and future, and how it's all connected. And this way, she also connected herself to someone else via her great grandmother, essentially. So she has the diaries of Ella May. Oh, let me look it up. I had it written down and I can't read my own handwriting. Um, there it is. Ella Mary Marriott Watson. She has her journals that she's essentially looking through. And so she's 19 at the time and she's fallen in love with this Glaswegian bricklayer, which her family is like, no, we don't want you with him. So we're going to take you out of Aotearoa, New Zealand, and we're going to go back to London. And hopefully that's going to change your mind. It didn't. Spoiler alert. But what was interesting, so we're hearing her story from New Zealand, we're hearing the story of what was happening with her in London, and then we're also hearing Flora's, observation of herself as she's looking at these archives. And then at one moment she says, and my great grandmother was, like living around Christchurch at the same time as Ella is back in London. And so the fact that she had a connection timeline wise with Ella and her great grandmother in Aotearoa, and then linking that to her own story and then her process of what it means to archive, it was just amazing. The rest of the book moves through her life, her relationships, her experiences, traveling back in Aotearoa. It's just really personal, and in some ways you can see the weaving and the connection of the essays of that they build on each other as it moves through the book. So in some way it really is that memoir in essay. I loved it. The first essay I just blew me away and I loved it so much. Highly recommend that one as well. And then I wasn't planning on getting this book, and the Occam Awards were going on at the time, or at least they were out, right? Like people, like the finalists were decided, and so they had all these displays in all the bookstores about like who was the finalist, and I think it might have been even reading this book that the Bad Archive that linked me to this book, or I read something. I can't even remember, but something made me go back to the bookstore again and pick up the Unsettled by Richard Shaw, and this subtitle is Small Stories of Colonization. And I did see this originally as like shortlisted and then longlisted and shortlisted for the awards, but I was like, I don't know about it. And then something prompted me to get it. So I went back to the store again and picked it up. So what's interesting about this is that Shaw had written a memoir, which after I was reading this, I went and got. Wrote a memoir, and through the discovery and talking about his family, he realized their role in colonization, essentially in removing people from their land and their homes, and what that means and the consequences of that and how that's part of his history. And so this prompted him to then write this book and to include other people's stories in here and the conversation of all of that. I think, early on, the very beginning of it really kind of gets to the heart of what's happening. And it's specifically for his family, who came from, I believe it was Ireland. And so this is the quote there on page 16. So So dispossessed in their own land, they came to Aotearoa and turned themselves into New Zealanders, but they became these new things on land that the colonial state had taken from other people. What was a beginning for them was an ending for others. And the fact that they also came from that same scenario themselves of the English in Ireland, added to the complexity of that. And I really liked that this was an honest conversation. It's often a difficult conversation. And it's also the willingness to really investigate history and see it for what it is, and acknowledge it, and then also having to wrestle with what that means personally for you, what it meant for your family in that space. And this has been something that I've been working through myself, not only about Aotearoa, but also about the United States of America, and even where I grew up in Pennsylvania, and the indigenous people that were displaced because of colonizers coming into that area. And I think so. The next quote I wanted to talk about was, so this is kind of like another quote that he talked about. This is more the introduction about what prompted him to do this. And so this is on page 27. To end the forgetting, of course, you must find a beginning. The Unsettled, this book, is also about the process of recovering these lost elements, what that experience can lead to, and what might then be done with often unsettling discoveries. It is really a book about excavation. And at the end of this introduction to the book itself, Shaw takes a moment to identify and to acknowledge that he doesn't want to marginalize anyone here, that everyone's voice is important, but then what the goal of this book is and what he's trying to do in this space. And so he kind of shares that out honestly and transparently. And this is a quote on page 36. But the conversations I would like to have are with those who have been part of the long process by which colonization has turned Aotearoa into New Zealand, regardless of which oceans their people crossed to get here or when they voyaged, because we all share a common political ancestry, if not a genealogical one, that reaches back to colonization. We are the ones who need to get our stories straight. Tangata Whenua have enough to get going on with. This is our work. So I really appreciated that he kind of set that up and was honest and transparent in his goals and the purpose of the book. So those were the books that I read while I was in Aotearoa. So to just do another quick run through of all of that, we have All Sorts of Lights, Katherine Mansfield, and the Art of Risking Everything. We have the Mires, Tightrope, Bad Archive, Swoon-Worthy, and the Unsettled. Thanks for joining me today. I hope this was helpful and maybe you learned about some new books, and I look forward to connecting with you again.